Hey everyone, it's Mike. For this video, I'm going to be probing into the epic assassins of Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. The Faceless Men have toppled empires, changing the face of the known world, and given the many-faced gods gift to countless denizens of Westeros and Essos. So who are these Faceless Men exactly? Whom do they serve? And what exactly is their endgame? We'll begin by traveling through their history, and hopefully that will help shed some light on one of Martin's most secretive societies. In a conversation that occurs in the book between Arya and the High Priest of the House in Black and White, known as the Kindly Man, or this is actually Jaqen H'ghar in the TV show, we learn that the Faceless Men originated in the slave pits of old Valyria. He speaks of the slaves that worked in the Valyrian mines and the wickedness of their masters. Often the slaves would uncover magical creatures such as fireworms, which are essentially smaller, wingless versions of dragons that would go on and wreak havoc amongst them, making survival particularly volatile. So as if being a slave isn't enough, you have to worry about fireworms and volcanic activity down there in the mines. So the first Faceless Man came forward right around this period. Daily he would find himself listening to the slaves, begging their respective gods for a reprieve from their life in the mines. It was at this point that he had an epiphany. What if all the slaves weren't praying to hundreds of different gods for death, but instead were praying to one god that had varying faces? This gave rise to the many-faced god, a god that encompassed all other gods. Later that day, the first Faceless Man would bestow his master's gift upon the most pitiful of his fellow slaves. The doom of Valyria, brought about by the eruption of volcanoes known as the 14 Fires, ended the slaves' misery along with the mines and everything else that ever made Valyria so great. If we take a look at Arya's conversation with the Kindly Man, you kind of detect the first hint of how the Faceless Men move behind the scenes and the formation of the many-faced god. That night he chose the most wretched of slaves, the one who had prayed most earnestly for release, and freed him from his bondage. The first gift had been given. And Arya's a little puzzled by this. She's wondering why they didn't kill the masters instead of the slave. And the Kindly Man's response is he would bring the gift to them as well, but that is a tale for another day, one best shared with no one. And this is a total tease, a total nod at the fact that the Faceless Men were involved during the destruction of Valyria. The doom, which burned Valyria to ash, was an eruption of 14 volcanoes that surrounded Valyria. How could the Faceless Men control volcanoes? Reddit user Shope4 puts forth a theory that claims the Faceless Men actually learned how to weaponize the dragon eggs. It is still uncertain in the history of A Song of Ice and Fire how dragon eggs are exactly hatched, but it's claimed to be quite volatile. We do see Daenerys hatch her 3 in the show and the book, and it's thought to be a combination of fire and blood that does the trick, but that is way oversimplifying it, I'm sure. And Daenerys' intuition to step into the flames at the right time is typically cited for how she was able to find the formula to hatch dragon eggs, because all of her Targaryen ancestors, they didn't know. There were several tragedies that we'll kind of touch on in a second, with famous Targaryens trying to hatch dragon eggs and things going awry. And attempting to hatch them in the wrong way causes an extreme amount of collateral damage and suffering. But how would the Faceless Men even hatch a dragon's egg? The short answer is they wouldn't be able to. And similar to the Targaryens, the Faceless Men's knowledge of how to turn a dragon egg into a warhead would have been lost with time. So before we continue on with this part, we need to address the question that's lingering on everyone's mind. How do we explain Jaqen's presence in the Black Cells in King's Landing? And while it's completely possible that Jaqen ended up in the Black Cells due to a judgment error, it's highly unlikely. He's a very skilled and trained assassin, so the odds of this happening are very slim. This leads me into a theory where Jaqen and Syrio Forel are the same person. In the book, Arya has an inner monologue about the two. She points out that they are alike but different to her. This could be due to the fact that both are Braavosi and both worship the many-faced god, but there are way too many idiosyncrasies for each of the two characters to cite that. So where is the evidence here? Well, we discussed the unlikelihood of a Faceless Man getting caught in King's Landing. We know that Syrio and Jaqen were both in King's Landing at the same time. But how do we explain Syrio's death? Well, we don't. We never saw him die in the show, nor did Arya see him die in the book. He dismantled several of Meryn's companions with relative ease, and when he gets to Meryn himself, his sword breaks. Then we lose sight of him. To supplement this, we get this classic bit from the Hound on Meryn's fighting ability.
It was not.
Was? He dead?
Yes.
How?
He was killed.
Who by?
Meryn Trant. That's why Sir Meryn's
Meryn Trant. The greatest swordsman who ever lived, killed by Meryn fucking Trant.
He was outnumbered.
Any boy whore with a sword could beat 3 Meryn Trant.
So the irony here is that Meryn was the only one that we know of who was aware of Syrio's actual fate. But Arya ensured that went straight to the grave along with Meryn. One thing I've learned from the series is that the showrunners are deliberate with their context clues, just like we saw in the R+L=J theory. So maybe there is something to this, or maybe I'm entirely wrong and will just look like a complete idiot once Wins a Winner or Season 7 comes out. So if Jaqen managed to escape, which he certainly would have had to have done, as Trent doesn't strike me as a guy that would simply take a prisoner, then what was he up to in the Black Cells at this point? Maegor the Cruel had several secret passages installed during his reign. And during A Feast for Crows, we actually learned that one of the passages from the Tower of the Hand leads to the Black Cells. Is it possible that Jaqen was using this as a staging ground as he searched for dragon eggs? Without diving down the Summerhall rabbit hole, we know that 7 eggs were brought to Summerhall, but then we kind of lose track of them after the tragedy occurs. Or do we? Perhaps Illyrio is full of shit and that clutch that he gave to Daenerys are the descendants of the Targaryen dragons, but that would only account for 3 out of the 7 that were brought to Summerhall. Ares II, also known as the Mad King, was said to have tried to hatch dragon eggs, but those were taken from Dragonstone. It's highly possible that Ares' eggs are hidden in the Red Keep, and that's what the Faceless Men are after. Less likely, but also possible, is Jaqen is just after some good old-fashioned wildfire. So after we lose sight of Jaqen whenever he departs from Arya, we pick up a strange event in the next book. In the prologue for A Feast for Crows, we're introduced to Pate, a novice at the Citadel who is drinking in a tavern. He is approached by a man who calls himself an alchemist and attempts to bribe Pate to steal a skeleton key to the Citadel from his senile old maester. Initially, Pate declines the offer, but then he decides to take him up on it in order to afford the maidenhead of a girl that he has a crush on. So Pate strikes the deal, hands over the skeleton key, and then Pate is believed to have died at the end of the prologue, but not before pulling back the hood of the alchemist, revealing a face that is described to be identical to the face of Jaqen H'ghar, or rather the face that he had assumed whenever he left Arya. So what is this faceless man looking for at the Citadel? In A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion reflects about the many tomes that are contained in the depths of the Citadel. Now, tomes, if you're wondering, are basically these large scholarly books, kind of like the ones that you see Sam gaze upon in the Citadel Library. Chiefly among these is A Death of Dragons, which could easily detail the ways to kill and perhaps even hatch dragon eggs. So, how the hell would the Faceless Men even get something as rare as a dragon egg? Well, we have an answer for that too. Euron Greyjoy speaks to Victarion Greyjoy during A Feast for Crows about how he had come across a dragon's egg but threw it back into the sea during one of his darker moods. This would appear to be Euron covering his tracks. In reality, though it hasn't been explained explicitly, Euron used the dragon egg as a payment to the Faceless Men in order to kill Balon. And obviously this is just a specific theory to the book. We literally saw Euron kill Balon in Season 6. And with respect to the payments that the Faceless Men require or take, there is no set price for them to assassinate someone, but rather their price depends on what you have to offer as a payment. A dragon egg would definitely cover the killing of the King of the Iron Islands, so it scales proportionally with the level of that figure and the difficulty to achieve the task. So some of you may be wondering, why do the Faceless Men hate dragons so much? Well, it's quite evident that since the inception of the Faceless Men, they have been completely oppressed by dragons and the Dragon's Masters, so there's definitely no love lost there. It's easy to see how having access to a weapon that is basically like a cheat code in a video game would end up leaving even the most stable of power structures in shambles. The Faceless Men no doubt would hate to return to the ancient ways of Valyria and see slaves being tortured in horrible working conditions. But that begs the question as to why they didn't overthrow the masters of Astapor or Meereen prior to Dany. In the end, I think it's simply that the Faceless Men hate magic. It's often been quoted that Daenerys' dragons are magic made physical, and even the Undying of Qarth sought to feed upon the dragons for their magical abilities. Since the dragons have been born again into the world, we've seen magic conducted by the followers of R'hllor increase, obsidian candles that allow people to talk to one another leagues away like the one that Quaithe has, wargs being born, and the ever-present winter in the north that threatens to consume all of Westeros, moving faster and faster towards its destination. Magic becomes more real when the dragons are around, and that makes many people uncomfortable. From the Faceless Men to the Maesters, a ton of people have serious interest in seeing Dany's dragons dead. And the Faceless Men would perhaps be the only ones that have the reasons and the abilities to see this through to the end. There's also a separate theory out there that holds that the Faceless Men are actually followers of the Great Other, the one who empowers the White Walkers, basically the opposing force to R'hllor, the god that Melisandre worships. There are some nice points being made about how the Faceless Men would love giving their master's gift to all living beings on Planetos, and really it's not a stretch, but I just don't think that's the direction that Martin's going in with this. The followers of the Great Other are not technically alive. A white would be described as a textbook definition of undead. Dead but still animated. This flies in the face of everything the Faceless Men stand for. The Great Other perverts the gift that the Faceless Men impart upon those chosen by the many-faced god, being that that person dies, but then they're resurrected into an abomination of what they once were. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Faceless Men's endgame. Do you actually think that they're opposed to Daenerys' dragons? What about Jaqen's purpose in Westeros? Do you have any Jaqen Arya theories? Those are always fun to take a look at. And make sure you click on the subscribe button, as I'll have a few more videos out between now and next weekend. Also, feel free to put in any requests that you might have for Game of Thrones videos, Walking Dead videos, or really any sci-fi/fantasy related stuff that you'd like to see. Well, it's been fun. I hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you back soon.